Welcome! Now it's time for part 2 of designing responsibly with and for users and communities. If you're wondering how to create front-end designs and intuitive interfaces for users, we'll talk about that here. I'm Nicole Pang. I'm a computer scientist at MIT, and I'm the creator of the computational action process. So let's get into it. So remember, we just discussed how to use all that great data that you collected during user community research to create your impact matrix and to design your project features. Now I'll explain how you will make and test the solutions you wrote in the impact matrix using design tools. In other words, now we'll figure out what your project should look like, and which is called designing user interfaces, because users will be interacting with these screens or features that you make. Why is design important? So take a moment and think about what design means to you, what design means maybe in the apps that you use on your phone, or maybe apps or websites on your computer. What about your favorite websites, or why are they your favorite? Or even maybe something simpler, what design means when you hold your toothbrush, or maybe when you drink a cup of water. What about push and pull doors? So everything has design, right? Design is all around us. You can think of so many examples of good and maybe sometimes bad design, right? So in this photo, you see roads. In this design, a road is also designed, right? And you can think about sometimes design can be annoying or frustrating to you, right? Maybe it's like ad pop-ups or login requirements into social media or other apps that you use. So it's really important when we design our solutions to consider what is the best interface or the best way that we can create our projects so users can interact intuitively with our projects. I really like these 10 principles of good design to base how I think about front-end design. So these were set by Dieter Rams, who is considered a founder of industrial design. So he says that good design is innovative, makes a product useful, is aesthetic, makes a product understandable, is unobtrusive. Good design is honest, it's long-lasting, it's thorough down to the last detail, and it's environmentally friendly. And finally, it involves as little design as possible, which is kind of interesting to think about. What I also like, you can see here on your screen, is Dieter Rams created a lot of industrial products like radios, which you can see on the left-hand side, but also the first iPod took a lot of inspiration from his designs. You can see the similarities here. So good design often transcends decades and time when it's very intuitive and satisfies both form and function. We'll go through 3 steps of designing front-end features. So we'll first talk about sketching and testing those sketches. Then we'll talk about wireframing, what that means, and testing those wireframes. And finally, we'll talk about how you can prototype and make an app. So I'll base most of my next topics on apps because most likely you're probably thinking about making an app, but this is very applicable whether you're making an application, or maybe a web app, or even thinking about a non-technical tool. Sketching, wireframing, and prototyping still is very relevant. Okay, what do I mean by sketch? You can see a sketch on the left-hand side here, and we call sketches low fidelity designs because it's really quick to make, right? You can sketch anything with a paper and pencil, and you can also create them really quickly. Now in the middle, you can see what I call a wireframe. So again, this is not quite the final app, right? There's still placeholders for images or videos or things like that, but it includes components that you would recognize in a typical mobile application. On the right-hand side, you can see we're beginning to form more of what looks like an application, so you can recognize buttons, and you can see it's probably more coded rather than sketched. Why is sketching so powerful? We already talked about this a little bit, but it's so easy to put pencil to paper and sketch out or draw out your idea, right? So it's important to start here because you don't want to start in the code where you might get bogged down with code or with CSS and kind of lose sight of your larger direction of your project. In the impact matrix that you just filled out, you already figured out what you want to design for your project, right? So now we'll add sketches to consider how you want to think about the front end of your project. I recommend you follow the KISS principle, or keep it simple, silly. So you start small. I recommend you start with paper prototypes, which again means just sketching with pen or pencil on paper the main screens that you want in your app or your project. You might want to follow the 80-20 rule, which means that probably 80% of the use cases are satisfied by maybe 20% of the screens. So go back to that user research and your impact matrix to figure out what are the main user workflows, right? The main user needs, and sketch out those main screens or the most important interactions that you want a user to have. And then you can test your paper prototypes. So you can share your paper prototypes with your team members or your family, or even better, the users that you researched and you did user research with, and get their feedback just on those sketches. This is why it's so powerful to test with paper sketches, because you can just simply sketch, test, and then reiterate based on that feedback. And you haven't committed any time into laborious coding yet. So try to not do too many sketches on one page. Make sure that it's clear and it's easy to understand. You can consider one sketch per sheet of paper to really fully flesh out what you want to create in that screen. Another fun thing that I'll point out is what is called Fitts Law. This is really helpful to just think about when you're designing a web application or mobile application. The general gist of Fitts Law is that you want to make your components big enough to be easy to click or easy to tap. And you also want to try to stay away from the edges of the screen. This is just a design tip, and you, of course, feel free to read more about it or to dig in more. But in a gist, larger clickable or tappable surfaces are generally easier for users. So consider that when you're creating your sketches. So like I already mentioned, you can test your sketches. You can test your paper prototypes. Most of your users are probably very familiar with mobile applications or web applications, and they can give you feedback when you test or show them your sketches on if it makes sense or what they would like to be changed. You could go back to your drawing board and sketch new ideas based on this feedback. After the feedback from sketches, we'll move into wireframing. So wireframing is really, really helpful because, again, you're moving into a higher fidelity state where it starts looking more like an app, but you don't have to quite go into coding yet, and you can continue to get feedback from users. So the key part of prototyping with wireframing is to get your key ideas and your main user journeys or your main user workflows tested and into your wireframe so you can get feedback on that. Now I'll give you some tools that you can use that actually industry like designers, engineers, innovators use to create wireframes so they can also test their ideas. The tools that I'll show you briefly are these. So we'll talk about MIT App Inventor, we'll talk about Marvel and Balsamiq as wireframing tools, and then I'll give you some other ideas if you don't want to use these tools but you still want to wireframe. You can even wireframe with other paint or draw tools like slides or PowerPoint, etc. Okay, first, App Inventor. So App Inventor is very powerful because you can create real Android and iOS apps without coding Android or iOS. You can code instead in App Inventor coding blocks. In addition, you can drag and drop components onto the screen, and you don't have to worry about alignment or things like that because the App Inventor interface and platform will help you with that. And what I really love most about App Inventor is that you can connect your phone to App Inventor, and there are instructions on the App Inventor site, and you can see live every change that you make, whether to code or to design. You can see those changes immediately on your phone. So it's super powerful for prototyping. So I've included a 7-minute App Inventor demo here.
Talk about how to get started with your first App Inventor app. So it's really simple. First, you want to go to appinventor.mit.edu. If you haven't done this before, it's very helpful to go over here to Resources, click on Get Started, and click on Setup Instructions for Testing. Now this is really important because we were going to live test your app while you're built, which will really help you figure out what your app looks like and your app's functionality. So the best way and the easiest way is to connect it to your phone, and the instructions you can see here. It's pretty simple. You just download the app on your phone, and then I'll show you how to connect it once we get into the App Inventor interface. There's another way to do this, a few other ways. You can check them out on the instructions page. I'm actually going to connect an emulator for this demo. And I have a Mac, so I have already done this. I have downloaded the App Inventor emulator. I've gone through the install, and it's already installed on my computer. Okay, so you figure out what works best for you. Again, go to Resources, Get Started, click on the number 1 Set of Instructions for Testing, and it's probably easiest if you download the app on your phone. All right, so make sure to do that. Now we're going to go and start an app. So you're going to click on this Create Apps. You're going to log in with your Google account, and then you're going to end up here or maybe in a new project page. I already have something here, so you can already see my project, but you're probably going to have a blank screen. Okay, so today we'll first make a Translate app, and then we'll make something else. So I'm going to go over here and start my project. I'm going to call this Translator App 1. Okay. So first you can see on the left-hand side here, there's a lot of things that you can add to your app. There's layout options, there's button and other user interface options. There's also stuff like video player, translate library, you can add drawings, you can add maps, you can add sensors for accelerometer sensor or pedometer to track steps. There's a lot of things you can add to an app. So there's a variety of things you can look at depending on the problem you want to solve. Now I said we want to take a look at a translator. So I want to type in something into my app. I want to click a button and have it be able to translate something out. Okay, so I'm going to drag in some items. Now before I do that, remember how we said we wanted to live test, right? So I'm going to go up here to connect. Now, if you downloaded the app on your phone, this is really easy. You just connect, you say connect to companion, and then you're going to open up the app that you downloaded on your phone, and you're either going to scan this code or write it in, and it should connect pretty quickly. So I will show you how to do it with the emulator. This will take a little bit longer. It needs to start on my computer. You can see here it comes up. Now this looks exactly like how it would look like in a real phone. Because I'm showing this demo on a computer, I'm going to use this emulator. But if you have a phone and you downloaded the app, which would look like this on your phone, it's probably easier to connect to a phone. It's definitely a little quicker than this. You can see I'm still waiting for the emulator to come up and run. But here it is. So again, when you open up the app on your phone, you'll see a screen like this. You'll open up either your camera or type in the code, and then you should get connected. So now you can see my phone shows exactly the screen that I'm working on. Now I can add another screen. I can add a screen 2, and each time I add a screen, that's a different state of the app. I'm going to stick with one screen for now, just to make it easy, but you can also add as many screens as you'd like. Okay, so I said I want to enter a text, and I want to translate it. So first, I'll go over here to user interface. I'll choose a label. Now a label is just a text field, so I'm going to say something that will help the user know what to do. So I'll say enter anything to be translated and spoken aloud. So the other thing I want to add is for the translation to be spoken aloud to me. I'm going to change the font size a little bit so it's bigger. Oh, maybe that was too big. You can see here on my phone it looks alright because it wraps around. I can change it smaller a little bit again just because I like everything on one line. Okay, great. So every time I change anything, you can see the app on my phone also changes. So this is what we mean by live testing. It's easy to see your changes directly on the phone and what the app looks like on a phone. Okay, so after this isn't really anything to be interacted with. It's just a line, a text line. So now I'm going to take a text box over here. I'm going to drag it. Now I kind of want this width to be bigger, so I click Fill Parent. I can see here on my phone the text box gets larger. And I'll add a hint, and I'll hint for the hint I'll say type anything here. Great. So this is where I'll put in what I want to translate. Okay, now I have to think about, okay, how do I translate? Well, actually, there are some tools for us to do that. There's this library called Yandex Translate. I'll move one over here. Actually, I'll move 3 over here because I want to maybe translate into 3 languages. Now I'll move 3 text-to-speech also. because again, I want the languages to be spoken aloud, right? When I click here, you can see they're not visible in the app, but they're still in the app. When I click over here, I can see the properties for text-to-speech. Now, what do I want to translate to? Well, I have these options of German, English, Spanish, French, and Italian. So I'll pick German for one, I'll pick Spanish for the other, and I'll pick French for the last one. Okay, great. So I have these. Now I just need some buttons. So I'm going to make it a little easier for myself. I'm going to add this horizontal arrangement. This is just a bar for layout. I'm going to let it fill to parent. I'm going to name, actually before I name this, I'm going to drag in a button. Go up here, I'm going to drag in a button. For the text for button, I'm going to say translate to German, because that was my first text-to-speech that I did. And then I'm going to put in a label here. Now the label is important because the label is going to write out the translation. So I'm going to delete the current text. Now I'm going to take a look at the arrangement. I kind of want everything to be left, but I want it to be centered in the middle of the bar. And I'm going to name this button, I'm going to rename this because it's going to help me understand what's going on here. So I'm going to name this DE for German button. I'm going to rename this label DE translation for German translation. Okay, so here's a trick. I'm going to copy this whole thing and I'm going to paste it. I'm going to paste it again. So now you can see I've pasted these elements. They also show up on my phone. But instead of German, this should be Spanish. So I'm going to name it ES button for Espanol, for Spanish. I'm going to rename this one ES translation. I'm going to do the same thing here, but for French. So I'm going to rename this French and this French translation. Okay, so you can see here I've got all my components here. The translation should show up next to the button, and I will type what I want to translate up here. Oh, and the final thing that I forgot, I'm going to change this to Spanish, change this to French, and you can see it also changes it here. So I've made my components, but of course I haven't coded anything, so nothing here does anything. So how do I code? Well, that's really simple. I go over here to blocks, and I have all the blocks that I need on the left-hand side. Okay, so I know basically when I click a button, I want the translation to start, right? I want the translation to take what I entered into the text box and translate it. Actually, just real quick, this text box here is called text box 1. I'm going to rename that just to help myself. So this is the input text. Okay, great. So it looks like when I click the button, how do I get the translation? Well, I can scroll down here into the translation blocks that I've got. So I'm going to call this translation library. I'm going to ask it to request a translation. Language to translate to. Well, this is the German button, and this is a little bit tricky, so you'll just have to see what I do here. But I know from this library that I have to write basically from English to German. So EN-DE. Text to translate. Well, I just said I want to get the input that I type in and translate that. So I'm going to scroll down here, take input text.text, move it here. Okay, cool. So this is saying when the German button is clicked. So over here I can click on it on my phone. I'm going to call the translate service. I'm going to request it to translate to German, and the text to translate is whatever I input here. Okay, great. So this is part of it, but I don't see anything right now, right? And it gives me an error. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to show the translation. So I'm going to go back down here to this one, and I have this other block called when the Yandex Translate library is called and gets the translation, do something else. Okay, so what do I want it to do? Well, I know I want it to show the translation. So I'm going to go over here to where I already created the German translation label. I'm going to set it, right? So it's set to nothing right now. There's nothing there. I'm going to set this. what am I gonna set it to? Well, I have this option. If I hover over this translate pill, I get this box. So I'm gonna get the translation. So this is telling me I'm gonna set the blank German label, which is currently detranslation.txt. I'm going to set this to get translation. So it's going to show the translated word next to the button. That's part of it. Now, I said I also wanted for it to speak aloud, right? So I'm going to go down here to text-to-speech. There's also this call text-to-speech.speak message. So what is it going to speak? Well, it's also going to speak the same thing, right? It's going to speak the translation aloud to me. So I'm going to grab this again. Again, remember I got this by hovering over this pill and grabbing this box. Okay, so does that look okay? I think that looks okay. Now, should we try it? So let's put in good morning into our phone app. I'm going to click on translate to German. Okay, great. Looks like that works. Now, does it work for Spanish? No. French? No. Why is that? Well, it's because I didn't make the code for the Spanish and French yet, right? Now, I wanted to do the same thing. So here's a trick. Because I know I want the buttons to do the same thing, I'm going to right-click on this block, or this block of blocks. I'm going to say duplicate, and now it duplicates it. Okay, great. So I'm going to drag this down. And now instead of the German button, I'm going to say when the Spanish button is clicked, call the second translation library. And instead of DE, it's going to be ES, right, because that's the code for Spanish. Now I'm going to duplicate this other text again, oops, so that this one can, I have a trash thing here, so if I need to change anything, I can move it to trash. So I'm going to do this again, right? So instead of DE translation, it's going to show up in the Spanish translation. Instead of text-to-speech 1, I'm going to text-to-speech 2 because that's the one that knows how to speak Spanish. So now let's take a look. Does this work for Spanish now?
Buena mañana.
Okay, great. Does it work for French? No. Why is that? Because I haven't made the blocks yet, right? I'm going to do the same thing for French. Move this down here. Duplicate this one. Move it down here. Notice I have these errors, right? Because it's the same block. It's telling me you're writing the same code. It's duplicated. I change this to this, and the error goes away. Now remember, I have to change this to French because now it's going to translate to French. Same thing here. I'm going to call the third translate library. I'm going to call the French translation text-to-speech. Okay, great. And now that's my code. Now, does the French one work?
Bulletin.
Great. Okay, so it works. So now I can enter in anything I want over here. I could say good morning. I could say I like ice cream. I'm going to translate to German,
Ich mag Eis. Me
Spanish,
gusta el helado.
French.
J'aime la crème glacée.
Great. Awesome. That's the first app.
Another tool, if you don't want to use App Inventor, is Marvel app. So Marvel app is, again, a free tool. And you can go and follow these instructions that you see on the screen in order to get onto Marvel app and start wireframing. Make sure you click on the Design a Wireframe section in order to get into their wireframing module. And the cool thing about Marvel app is you can choose what platform or surface you want to design in. So you can do either apps or you can do websites. And it provides you these components that you would recognize as a user, but it's not quite coding. So it gives you a higher fidelity design that you can wireframe and then of course test with users on. So this is one option. Another option is Balsamiq. I've actually used Balsamiq a lot as a product manager at my jobs at Google and Tumblr. And Balsamiq is really cool because, again, similar to Marvel, it gives you the components that you can easily drag and drop so you can convey your idea of what you want to build in your app or website without coding it. Balsamiq has been around for a while, so most people in industry also know about it, and it's also a free, or at least has a free trial for you to use. You can also follow the steps on the screen to go and use Balsamiq. It also provides app modules or components that you can drag and drop, as well as web components that you can drag and drop if you want to create a website for your project. So finally, I'll mention to you that if you don't want to create a login or account with these tools, you absolutely don't need them to wireframe. You can wireframe with simple drawing tools. So sometimes in a pinch, I like to use PowerPoint or Google Slides to create some quick designs. The key thing here is to remember to try to keep your designs in a wireframe mode. So everything should be in shapes as much as possible. The more you default into copy and pasting existing designs, the more it kind of limits creativity in some senses. So this works super well in a pinch. I've done it many times in my career, but just keep in mind that try to use shapes or try to use those key wireframing tools that to convey your ideas rather than screenshots or images, etc. Okay, so I'll show you another awesome student project that really highlights how they took advantage of designing and wireframing to get their project across. So this student team created an app called My Buddy. And again, the student team was a part of the MIT Future Makers 2021 program, and they were in the Applied Deep Learning track. The problem they wanted to solve is to help create useful tools to help students or kids diagnosed with autism, which is 1 in 54 children in the US. So these slides are also on the Computational Action website. You can go there to look in more detail on the student project. So this student team recognized that social interactions become stressful and challenging for children who are diagnosed with autism, and they wanted to create something that could maybe help this problem. They did some market research on existing tools or existing programs in the community that also try to help with this problem. And then they came up with their goal, which is to provide a tool that aids in emotion recognition and regulation for children or individuals with autism. Okay, so this is really cool. I wanted to show that this team created a wireframe. You can see this on the right side of the screen here. And they created a wireframe of the My Buddy app. You can see these are just wireframe components, very similar to what we just saw in those examples on Marvel or Balsamiq. But it really illustrates what they're trying to do with their project. So for instance, the team also goes into one component of their project is emotion detection in real time. And another component of the project is to use authentic conversations in order to help train their artificial intelligence model to better recognize speech and tone for the user. And they showed some more wireframes. This is still the team's project of their My Buddy app, but you can see even simple sketches and wireframes really do a lot to convey exactly what project they're creating and they want to create. And they didn't need to implement the entire project in code, whether in App Inventor or other code, because these wireframes really do a lot to convey the idea of the project that they want to create. So as a summary, there's so much you can do from sketching to wireframing before you even code. These are some steps that go into more detail of how you can think about sketching, testing those sketches, wireframing, testing those wireframes, and then creating prototypes, and again, repeating testing with users. You'll also find the detailed instructions on the Computational Action Toolkit, as you've heard many times already. And you can feel free to keep wireframing and designing. So in the next section, we'll talk about implementing your designs with code. But before you do that, make sure that you spend enough time sketching, wireframing, and testing and getting feedback on your designs in order to make that intuitive app for users.